All right, we just got the F350 donor truck loaded up on the trailer to start our excursion build. So this is the frame, suspension, axles out of a 2006 Ford F350 crew cab long bed. So we are going to be using the axles, suspension, brakes, and front frame section from about here on our Ford Excursion. So, but yeah, we just winched it up. Got our new winch set up, put on the trailer, and she winched up nice. So we got Badlands winch set up inside. She needs a new battery. Had to put a charger on there to finish this, but yeah, it was working out good. We ended up putting some deck lighting on there, so if we're doing some winching at night, we'll be able to do that. So let us get this backed into the shop, and we'll start getting it taken apart. You can see here on the Excursion, factory Excursion frame, nothing is boxed rear of the engine cross member. It's only boxed from the front forward. So I think they reinforced the engine cross member too, because it is tied in for the shock towers. I'll go show you the new frame. All right, we got this in the shop. I guess I can go over what we're going to do and why. So again, this is off 2006 F350 4x4 Power Stroke crew cab long bed. It was a donor truck. We ended up getting, or I just was going to purchase the frame, suspension, and axles. The guy ended up not wanting to deal with parting it all out, so he gave me the whole thing. It did not drive, supposedly because the transmission blew a transmission line, and he made me a deal. I think I paid $1,600 for the whole thing. The engine did run. It's actually in our F350 2003. So we ended up parting it out, and it basically paid for itself. So that's a good thing. Now, what we're planning is to do, if anybody's driven a Excursion, you'll know that the suspension is terrible. They made it extra soft to give it a more compliant ride, but it handles terrible. I went ahead and put on the polyurethane bushings in mine, and it helped, but it's still not the greatest. So I knew, we drove it for a couple of years, came up with what we wanted, did some research, a lot of different options. You could buy just an aftermarket lift kit with new springs. You could do a leaf spring conversion, which you take off of a F250, F350 and swap out the front springs. That'll help. And then there's some aftermarket coilover conversions you can do. And then there's this option that we're going to do. We're basically going to convert it to coil spring front end and F350 rear end. Now, in 2005, they went to the coil spring, Ford did. And so that gives us a couple benefits. Gives us a little better front suspension. The axles are slightly wider. Because of the coil suspension, you can actually turn sharper, so I'll get a better turning radius. It's got bigger brakes, which is always a plus. It actually has a true Dana 60 in the front end instead of the Dana 50 that the F250 and Excursions came with, which is basically a Dana 60 housing with Dana 44 axles. So this will be a true Dana 60. You can see here they reinforced the frame. They boxed it going back. Not a lot, but Ford claimed, I believe, and I'll look it up just to make sure, 30% more rigid frame. So they beefed up this whole front section for support of the coil buckets. So you can see here, there's a weld. We'll cut these rivets off and then cut the weld, and you can almost see where it kind of slides back in there. And that's the plan, is to cut this off. Obviously, we'll cut these rivets off here, and we'll unbolt this, and the whole front section, suspension, and the front frame from here forward will come out, and that'll be put onto the Excursion. The frame is shaped differently from this section back. The frame is shaped differently for the Excursion body, so we can't use just a frame swap on it. Probably would have been the easiest, but again, going this route, the axles are going to be slightly wider, but we're getting heavier duty axle, front axle, coil springs, suspension, better handling, and bigger brakes. And then we're going to go ahead and swap out the rear axle because it is still Sterling 10.5, but it is slightly wider to match the front axle. So we'll go ahead and swap it out. We're going to use the F350 leaf springs, the whole setup here, except for this overload. We'll remove the overload because I believe that will damage our air conditioning lines. So we'll get rid of that. So that should give us quite a bit more suspension in the rear of the Excursion. I am going to be putting airbags on it as well for load leveling. And then we also have new shocks, front and rear. We got some Bilstein 5100 shocks, so we'll be putting those on there. So here, out of this, we're gonna basically unbolt the leaf springs, the shocks, the brake lines, and the shackles, and roll that out. That's what we're gonna take and put on our Excursion. And then on the front, we're gonna go ahead and do some cutting and grinding and take the front section of the frame off. And that's all we need from it for Excursion build. I am gonna remove the fuel tank and some other things. There's a trailer hitch, spare tire winch, receiver. I'm going to take off just in case we want to use it on another project, and then we'll scrap everything else. So that's the plan. So the Excursion is going to get slight lift, probably I'm guessing about a 1.5 to 2 inch lift from the factory, just going with this F350 suspension. So all in all, should be a big improvement. It is going to be quite a bit of work, but first thing I'm going to do is just get started grinding and cutting rivets and welds off, and then we'll get this separated and go from there. Should be pretty fun. We're going to rebuild the differentials as well. I got new bearings. We got some traction devices to put in the front and rear. I'm actually putting an air locker in the front axle and a gear limited slip in the rear. Once we start working on the rear axles, I'll explain why I chose what I chose. So, all right, I had a late start. Last night, the kids came down and got excited. We're starting on the Excursion project, so they helped me. We removed the receiver hitch off the back. I removed the spare tire hoist and bracket because that'll go on the one on the F350 is not working. So that's all taken off. Allows me to push this back further. Remove the fuel pump. Probably won't be using it, but I removed it because we'll be doing some grinding there. I pulled them fuel lines. We'll pull off out of the way. So if we need to, we can use them. But I think what I'm going to start first is grind these 4 on each side off, punch it through, let this drop, and then we'll grind these off. There's 4 on both sides. Actually, there's a 5th one. There's one on the bottom. So we do these, then we cut our weld, and then this section should slide off. It's just tucked in about right there. And then that'll be pulled apart. We'll wheel this out of the way, then we'll pull this front forward, and we'll yank the back end off, which should go fairly quick. And then we'll drag this frame out, set it with our other extra frames for scrap metal or projects. We might build a little farm trailer out of it, who knows. But yeah, I'm going to get to grinding, and we'll catch up with you once I get some grinding done. All right, so just to catch you guys up, I got all of them on this outside here. We got the top one. I started hammering that through. I just wanted to see how what the diameter of the pin was. Give me an idea. Got that. There's 3 on that side. So I still have 2 on the bottom here. And then if you look, 2 on the inside right there. So I'm going to try to get those from the inside. And then same with the ones up here. That way I'm not trying to grind upside down. So this side I basically got, I think, 4. Let's see. No, just 1. So there's just 1 on this side. So we got 1 more plus 2 here on the inside. So 3 more to grind down on this. And then I'll do that side. And then we'll start hammering through. I'll get my air chisel out and see if we can hammer through. You're going to see some of them recessed. Yeah, we're going to get back at it and get this finished up. So I'm thinking as long as my discs grinding wheels hold up, we should get all the grinding done this evening. If not, I'm going to use a cutoff wheel to cut the weld. I'm just going to go right down the middle and cut that, and then I can clean it up. So I think there's a weld on the bottom too. So 1, 2, 3. Doesn't look like they welded. No, they didn't weld the inside, so that's good. All right, let me get back to grinding. Don't want to bore you guys with that. I ended up switching over to a cutoff wheel, and I just cut those rivets right off. That one I got to go a little further, but the wheel bore down. Just got to get a different angle for that one. That's what I did over here. So I'll just take a grinding wheel and just take the rest of that little bit of metal off, and we'll be good to go. So a lot quicker. So I'm just going to hit everything what I can with that cutoff wheel. When it gets down that small, I just switch it over, and I use it to cut my weld on my seam until it's too small to even do that. Then I'll put a new blade on there and finish cutting those off. All right, so what I found works best is to use a cutoff wheel. You can see I went through a couple of them and cut that mushroom off from the rivet. Just cut it flat, and then just come back through with the grinding wheel and grind everything nice and clean. So we got all of it all grinded down. I use a chisel just to make sure these were grounded down enough to kind of separate it. So I'm going to fire up my air compressor and try to use a air hammer and see if she'll drive out. Okay, so we got everything separated. I'm going to take those off after I take the bracket off the trailing arm, and we'll or the radius arm, and then I think it'll be easier to probably put in the press or something and just press them out. But everything else has been separated, chiseled, the welds cut. So there's 2 sizes of rivets on this that you're gonna have to grind off. The ones for your radius arm bracket are the biggest. They're the large of the 2. I'll show you what I had to do. This is what I used, and that's what these are. So you can see. So basically, you grind off one edge. Then I used a 1/4 inch drill bit, drilled out into the center. Then I stepped it up to a 1/2 inch drill bit and drilled it out. And then I used this long barrel Harbor Freight impact hammer, and that drove it out. Still had to take a little bit of work, but yeah, that's how we had to do it. Now you see these are the smaller ones. These you can grind it off one end, and then the hammer can drive it out. But yeah, it'll take you some time and some effort. It's not going to be an easy thing, but definitely recommend drill it first with a 1/4 inch bit, and then step it up to the 1/2 inch bit, and then hit it with your hammer. So that's how I got my frame rivets out. And except for these, I left those in there because I want to separate this, get the rear axle off, get the frame out of here, so I got a little bit more room. And then maybe we can pull out the press and see how those work. If nothing else, I'm gonna probably cut the rest off, because what happens if I just started pounding on these like that, it'll start mushrooming it out again right there where it goes through, and it just mushrooms itself out, and it doesn't want to go through. So that's why you drill out the center. So when you drill out the center and you hammer it in, it kind of folds in on itself and slides through. So some of them get pretty interesting, like that one. So that's it. I'm going to try to separate it now and roll this section forward, and then we'll roll the frame forward and get the rear axle off. And then I'll probably winch the remaining part of the frame off onto the trailer and get it out of the way. All right, let me figure out how I'm going to get this separated, and we'll catch back up with you. All right, we finally got the front end taken off. I decided to do it the hard way. So once I get this all cleaned up, I'll show you guys what not to do to make your job a little easier. But we got it apart. We persevered. So now we rolled it forward enough. Now we're going to try to take this rear axle off, and then that way tomorrow I can just drag this frame out of here, get it out of our way, and we can start tearing down the axles, tearing apart the suspension parts. I want to clean everything. Everything gets a good coat of paint. Nice thing about doing it like this is we're going to take the new steering box, or the updated steering box. It's supposed to be stronger than the pre-05s. Obviously the front frame. So we'll get all this. We'll be in better shape. So we're going to paint everything up after we clean it. We're going to rebuild the axles, put our traction devices in, put new brakes, pads and rotors. We got new shocks. I believe I got new brake lines. I put some extended length stainless steel brake lines. So we've been waiting on a lot of stuff. Hopefully we got most of it in to do this. We'll get the axles in this frame section all set up, so then we can start tearing apart the Excursion. So yeah, this should be fairly easy. We'll take the leaf springs off and leave it connected to the axle. We'll take the shocks off, disconnect our ABS sensor and our brake lines, and we should be good to go. Should be fairly straightforward for the front, other than some big heavy duty bolts. But yeah, let us get this tore apart. My kid's down here helping, so we'll get to it. All right, we got the rear axle unbolted. Just got the frame suspended by our gantry crane, but we got leaf springs unbolted, shocks, so everything's disconnected. I retained all the parking brake hardware and cabling all in one piece in case we need it, and disconnected that electrical connection for the analog brakes. I believe that's what that's for. Yeah, so I think we're good. Oh, and the brake line we disconnected. So we'll probably leave it here for the night. It's getting late, and then tomorrow we'll come in and we'll get all this stuff. Jenna's down here helping me. We'll get all this stuff out of here. We'll winch this frame up onto the trailer, go stack it with our other frames, and that'll give us more room to survey these axles and suspension and come up with a game plan. At least it'll be a big step to get them off this donor truck and, you know, start working on them when we need to. All right, that's going to be it for tonight. We'll see you guys in the morning. All right, guys, we got a couple projects going on all at the same time, mainly because we're waiting on parts and such, and we're trying to get a lot accomplished this spring. We got some big goals. So where we left off, we ended up taking off the front and rear axles and the front frame assembly off the Super Duty 2006 Super Duty F350. The stuff you see here we're going to use on our Excursion build. So I had to interrupt this for picking up a tractor. We've been looking for one, and this is perfect timing because spring's coming and weeds are going to go out of control, so we need something to maintain the property with. So we got that. You'll see some videos coming up with the Kubota. It was abused and neglected, so it'll be a good series of videos, I think. The goal is to dismantle these, get everything stripped down just to the axles and wheels. I may not tear into the axles themselves yet, but we'll see how much time we have. No time to waste, so we're gonna get these stripped down again. All right, so we're going to call that good for this rear axle. I left the brake cables on, the brake lines, so they don't get damaged. Once we start taking everything off on the ends with this up on a lift or stands, then we'll worry about those. So at least it's easy to maneuver around. Now we get started on this. We'll take everything that's bolted to something off, and that's the goal. All right, let's get started. All right, we got the frame section lifted up off the axle, and we're at the axle here. So the parts stacked up there. This is what we got so far. I think next, if I pull that shock off, then I'll pull these two brackets off, then I'll pull the trailing arms off, then I'll work on the steering linkage. And that's probably, might be as far as we go today. I might leave the steering linkage on there for now. All right, so I got my axles pushed back to the back for now. think it looks pretty good. We'll get the steering linkage off here in a little bit once we get ready to start working on them. Got the frame hanging here. I'll probably pull my trailer underneath it, set it down there. It's still pretty heavy, so I'm not going to touch the frame until I get ready to put it on the actual Excursion frame, and then we'll clean it up, paint it, but we'll do the axles, we'll get all that stuff done. But before we move on to the axles, got everything set up on pallet out here, all the brackets, hardware, sway bar, springs, all this stuff is going to get cleaned up and painted before we install it. So that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one where we start tearing into these axles.